So, what we are going to do today, there are two major two issues that we are going to discuss. One is about value chain, global value chains, certain issues related to that. How do you, if you are interested in analyzing a country's participation in global value chain, how do you go about it, right? So, that is one particular issue that we discuss in the first part of the lecture. In the second part, we look at one particular empirical method that generally people use, those who are working in international trade or related issues like FDI or migration, not necessarily international, even domestic, like what is the migration that happens between two districts in a state, or two districts across the in the country, or to the relationship between two states in the country, trade relationship, foreign direct investment relationship, migration, and all these kind of relationship. When we want to analyze that, whether it is in the context of international relationship or relationship within a country, but between two geographical units. So, the particular model that is used in such context is the gravity model, right. So, we talk about the gravity model. How do you derive the gravity model? Because most people who use the gravity model just use it without really bothering about from where is the gravity model coming from. Is it directly taken from physics, the idea of gravity, or does it have a basis in economics, right. So, can we derive gravity model from an economic theory model, because that is important, because otherwise if we say that this is an idea which is there in physics and we are just applying it, that does not sound good, right. We need to kind of show that the gravity specification can be drawn using an economic theory, a theory model. So, and we show that first, and then we think about certain cases where it can be applied using Indian data. So, these are the two things that we are going to discuss today. So, now this discussion, the first part of the discussion about the global value chain is particularly important in the current context. Why? Because if you take newspapers these days, you see some about international trade every day in the newspaper, right, and that has happened mainly because of the recent developments, including the election, United States election, where Trump won, then some of the other developments like Brexit that has happened. So, generally if you look at the developments in advanced countries, including US and many parts of Europe, you see that there is a general tendency towards protectionism, and against free trade. So, that's this marks an important departure from what have been happening for so many years earlier. So, there is a general tendency towards greater protectionism in advanced countries. At the same time, in developing countries, India, China and other countries, they are more eager to participate in international trade. They want to see international trade as an instrument for growth and job creation, right. So, you see a marked different tendencies in the world if you look at the current debate in international trade, and all this happened on the basis of certain arguments that were made at the time of US election. So, some of the argument is that a major influential argument in the advanced countries among the politicians is that trade with developing countries is not a good idea for advanced countries, because trade with developing countries means these advanced countries import labor intensive goods, right, garments or leather products or footwear, all these labor intensive products. So, when they import these labor intensive products, the domestic demand for labor goes down. So, employment reduces in advanced country, because it means exporting jobs to other countries. So, when you are importing labor intensive goods from China to United States, it means exporting US jobs to China. That is the way it was portrayed, right. Similar is the case with the FDI. So, when American companies go and invest in developing countries, it is argued that instead of investing domestically, when they invest in other countries, it is like exporting US jobs to other countries. And so, this is one important argument that is being made. The other argument is that when countries do offshoring, offshoring basically means outsourcing, international outsourcing of activities, then that again means exporting of US jobs to those countries. Instead of those jobs being created domestically in US, now it is being done in other countries. So, it is not good for US. So, that is another argument that is being made. That is why Trump is against trade with China, Trump is against US companies going and investing in Mexico, or he is against US companies offshoring activities in India in service sector, for example, and in China manufacturing. So, these are some of the issues which becomes very important. The other thing is about migration, that Mexican low skilled workers are moving to United States and they are stealing domestic jobs, and that is why he wanted to construct a wall there, so that they are not coming. So, that is again issue related to globalization, and then there is all issue about trade is responsible for wage inequality. Skilled labor is gaining more, unskilled labor is not gaining as much as skilled labor. Their wages are not rising as fast as the wages for skilled labor. Now, he says that this is the people who oppose globalization generally say that globalization has something to do with this. Why? Because when US is importing labor intensive goods, it means that the demand for unskilled labor in United States declines, right. The demand for unskilled labor in United States goes down, and that means their wages will not rise, because they do not have the domestic demand for low skilled labor is reduced because of more import coming from poor countries. So, that is adversely affecting the wages for low skilled workers in United States. That is the argument, right. So, then there is also this what is called China bashing, which has been happening not recently, it has been happening for quite some time. When there was a global financial crisis that happened in 2008-9, so many people said that China is responsible for that financial crisis, because there is this huge global imbalance that is being created by China because of its major trade deficit, US major trade deficit with China. So, US has been running big trade deficit with China, and then some people said that that trade deficit led to a global imbalance, and that is a reason for global financial crisis. And then in different parts of the world, people also say that China is dumping their products in other countries, right. So, that is another argument. They are manipulating their currency to get an undue advantage in the export market. These are all different charges against China, and that is why China has become the target for the current trade war. That Trump has been initiating tariffs against China, and he is planning to do even more. That is what the recent newspaper says. So, there is this global there is a trade war that is going on. There is all these kind of arguments which are being used in the elections, US elections. There is a Brexit discussion that is going on. So, these are all various issues that we keep hearing in newspapers these days. Now, in this context, we want to kind of understand the truth, right. What is just rhetoric in this whole discussion, and what is the truth? What is argument? Which one of these arguments are empirically founded or theoretically can be justified, and which all these things are has no basis, just people are using just for purpose of winning elections. So, what I am going to discuss today has some will help you in terms of understanding some of the basis for some of these different arguments. There is also this question of free trade agreements, that free trade agreements are not good for United States, because they have signed this agreement without keeping in mind the interests of the US. So, that is why, because earlier Obama wanted to have a big free trade agreement involving Japan and many Asian countries, Australia, Japan, New Zealand, Vietnam, and several Asian countries, Trans-Pacific free trade agreement. but when Trump came to power, he said that we are not going ahead with that plan. So, he scrapped that. He renegotiated NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement. So, the underlying logic there is that globalization was not working in favor of US, right, and it was working in favor of other countries, and US is not getting benefit from that. So, now what we are going to do here is that, so this is explains the whole thing, the entire rhetoric in this. So, what this cartoonist is trying to show here is that when there was a meeting, Trump had a meeting with that North Korean leader 1 year back, the first meeting. At that time, right, because this is a rhetoric that the Asians are stealing US jobs is very much there. Based on trade, this is the entire argument that Asians are stealing US jobs. So, when he is saying that I will destroy America, he is saying that no, that is my job. 1,000 million crore, $1,000 million. Export is $100 million. The domestic output, which includes that 100, is 1,000. So, domestic value added is say $700 million. Right. So, value added is $700 million, that means basically 300 million is the of intermediate inputs, right. 700 is the what is going to labor and capital. I am just simplifying. So, you will get 7 divided by 10, right, as V. So, 0.7. So, 0.7 multiplied by 100, 0.7 multiplied by 100 is 70. So, that basically means that when you are exporting 100 million worth of automobile, the domestic value addition is 70. The remaining 30 is not accounted by the domestic, it is foreign, right. So, basically that is the way, but that is the direct calculation. You also need to calculate the linkages. The automobile, when the automobile industry is exporting 100 million, it had created linkages with iron and steel, mining, agriculture, tire industry and so on. So, we need to calculate that also, that is why we have that middle term, right. So, no, that is not captured there, because when automobile is industry is giving you statistics, it will not give you statistics about what is the domestic value addition happened in iron and steel industry, right. It does not give you that information, it only gives you that we have used this much of iron and steel, that is included in that 100 or in that 1000, that how much of iron and steel is used is included in that 300 is part of that iron and steel, right. So, that information they give, how much they have used when they produced, they do not give you information what happened to the iron and steel factory, the value addition there, that information we want to capture. So, that is what, because they are selling some 100 million of iron and steel to automobile company. When they are selling it, there is also a V, there is also a small v in iron and steel company, that also need to be calculated. So, how much value addition happens in the iron and steel company, that is what it does, right. So, it captures the full thing. Now this domestic value added can be decomposed into two parts, one is the direct value added and the other one is what is attributed to backward linkage. So, this can be separated into two parts. Now, how do you separate it? It is very straightforward. So, what we do here is that in the this thing I minus AD inverse, if you take it as a diagonal matrix, the I minus AD, if you take it as a diagonal matrix means only the diagonal elements are positive, off diagonal elements are 0. That means we are not looking at the other sectors, the linkages with other sector, we are only looking at the direct what is happening in the particular sector. So, that gives us the direct value added in the automobile industry. Now, if you once you get to the direct, then if you subtract that direct from the total, what remains is the linkage, right. You first get the total, then you get the direct, then you subtract the direct from the total, then what you get is the linkage. So, that we can attribute as backward linkage, right. So, that way we can decompose the total domestic value addition into two parts. Now, this can also be done based on a different concept, which is the forward linkage. Now, forward linkage, the automobile industry, which I said earlier, is like how automobile industry is linked backward with other sectors, which is supplying input to automobile. Now, forward linkage means, now forget about automobile, think about iron and steel industry. Now, iron and steel industry has a forward linkage with automobile. It also has a forward linkage with the construction. It has also forward linkage with the machine tool industry. So, it has forward linkages with many sectors. So, some of those sectors with which it will have forward linkages, they are exporting sectors, like automobile is an exporting sector, machine tool is an exporting sector, but construction is not an exporting sector, right, but still it has forward linkage. So, we can calculate how much of domestic value addition happened in iron and steel industry because of its own export, direct export, because iron and steel may export directly to other countries, iron and steel, not indirectly through forward linkage. It may also export directly. So, there is a direct component there. Then there is also indirect component through forward linkages with all other sectors for which iron and steel is supplying its input. So, that is basically the concept of forward linkage, and that is also relevant. Now, even if a sector does not export at all, suppose that iron and steel does not export, even then it may depend upon export. Why it depend on export? Because it is supplying inputs to other sectors which are exporting. Right now, if iron and steel is not exporting, but automobile is exporting, and iron and steel is supplying inputs to automobile, so iron and steel depend upon export, right. So, that is what the second measure is doing. Now, this is very similar to this, the only difference is that instead of capital X here we have just replaced here. This is a diagonal matrix of capital V, here it is a vector, this is a matrix, this matrix becomes a vector here. So, it is a slight change, but what you get is completely different. One is capturing forward linkage, the other one is capturing backward linkage. So, same way, now this is about domestic value addition, same way you can also estimate employment, how many employments jobs are created through backward and forward linkage, basically same approach. The only difference here is that instead of small v that we used there, now we have a small l. Now, what is small l? Small l is employment divided by output for different sectors. So, that will give you, when there is 100 million worth of automobile export is happening, how many jobs are created, right, because the employment divided by output shows that number. So, we have to get the employment divided by output to get this, and again here you can measure it forward backward linkage concept, you can decompose into direct and indirect for both, and so you get both the numbers. I am not spending more time on that, but basically now how do you get the data for doing all that, right. These are the method. How do you get the data? You need input output table for India to get all these, to compute the Leon-Diff inverse. We need value added data, we need output data, we need employment data. All this should be in a consistent format, right. They should be matching each other, they should not be unrelated. So, all these are the requirements. Now, for India, I have done this exercise, and if you are interested, I have given the reference in the end, I will give you the reference. So, this is also available as an Exim Bank of India paper, it is an occasional paper, you can download it. The entire exercise is discussed in detail there. So, what we have done is that for India, the input output table the government stopped publishing for some time. The latest input output table is available for 2007-8, right. Earlier they used to publish it every 5 years, once in every 5 years, because input output table is an important policy, is an important tool for policy makers, especially during the planning period, because they want to allocate resources for different sectors, and they made that decision on the basis of input output table, the linkage of one sector with all other sectors, all these things. So, the Mahalanobis model, for example, is an input output table model, right. So, but now they are not publishing this. So, what we have done is that we have used whatever is available from the government, the latest being 2007-8, before that it is 2003, then 1998, once in 5 years. So, we used all that, and then there are gaps in between for those years for which input output table are not available. So, what we have done is that for those years where it is not available, we have estimated our own input output table. How we did it? Basically, the idea is that go back to the entire statistics at the most micro level, right. When the CSO is calculating input output table, they are using that data, right, from the micro unit level. So, for manufacturing sector, the unit level data is the plant level data from the annual survey of industries for the formal sector. For the informal sector, they have the unorganized sector surveys, right. For services and agriculture sector, you have national account statistics. So, from all these you will get to the basic data on value added, data on output, all that. Then NSSO gives you data on employment. Now, unit level data from NSS gives you data at the 5-digit C level.
Going through this gross export and ratio column, we can also infer as export has increased all because of integration has increased.
Yes, that is what we are showing. We are going to show. So, the export has increased. So, this much of the increase in export would not have happened if the integration was not there. So, if this was not declined, this would not have increased this much, because you see that lot of our export is oil, lot of our export is gems and jewelry. Now, that export will not have happened if we were not importing crude petroleum or or the gems from Belgium and other countries, right. So, that means that is this increase in gross export is an outcome of that decline on DVA to export ratio. We are going to estimate that econometrically, right. So, we would expect in that case that this ratio should be negatively related to this, right. In a regression framework, this should be negatively related, because the fall in DVA to export ratio should lead to more gross export.
So, the fall, doesn't it imply that our export is becoming more import dependent?
Import dependent. Yeah, import dependent means what? It is a global value chain. You are participating in global value chain.
But import is also a leakage.
Import is a leakage, but if you are not going for that leakage, you are not going to get what you want to get it here, the gross export.
But sir, it should depend on
Then 2005. So, in between it is missing, but we have a percentage distribution of NIC 5-digit codes available for both the years from the usual survey. Usual survey, we know the distribution at the 5-digit level. Then what we do is that we linearly interpolate that distribution. So, if a particular 5-digit industry, like so for example garment industry has a 0.2, then no, I understand there are all these problems, but then so it is all true. So, what we have done is that given the availability of data, we made the best use of what can be done. So, the other option is not to do anything, right. So, either you do, so our being economist, our job is what, or statistician, our job is what, because if the world is perfect, all statistics are available, then we are jobless, right. Then we do not have to do anything, because everything is available. So, our existence is justified because data is imperfect, right. So, when data is imperfect, how can we make use of that to get something? That is why we have job.
Sir, I mean to say some economists or as well statisticians argued you can't extrapolate or interpolate from survey data because you
Right. So So, what we are extrapolating is not a usual extrapolation that people no, there is no absolutely any extrapolation done here, it is all interpolation. So, extrapolation can be always dangerous, because what happens is sometimes things can go really really off the mark if you do extrapolation, but interpolation it will not go that much, because you know what is the value in 2005 actual value, you know what is the value in 2000, the values in between will be always in between them. So, it is basically you are linearly reaching there, you are assuming that there is a linear trend towards the value from 2000 to 2005. So, you are only making that assumption that it is increasing in a linear way from the value actual value observed in 2000, the actual value in 2005. So, that is exactly the reason why we do not want to do extrapolation, that is why I entered it in 2012-13, because the last survey is available for that year. I did not do afterwards, because I did not want to do extrapolation, because the moment you do extrapolation it is out of your hand, right, the things can move completely awkward number you can get. So, interpolation still you do not have to worry too much, because you are working within the constraints imposed of the initial value and the final value, within that you are making the estimates. Okay. So, here again we can decompose into direct, indirect, etc., and the share of export jobs attributed to export has increased from 9% to 14.5%, right, that is the increase in the share. So, that means about 15% of total jobs created in the country can be attributed to exports in 2012-13. So, if exports were not there, that many jobs would not have been there, right. So, that the export is becoming an important source of job creation in the country. Now, I have lot of things to show, but we do not have the time. So, what I will do is that I will these are kind of analysis at the disaggregated level. What I have shown just now is the macro picture, like in the overall way. Now, you have this distribution available for 112 industries. You can also show it for manufacturing, agriculture, services, all this detailed distribution can be shown, how it is different for different sectors, etc. I am not going to do that because of the lack of time. This I will just show you, but because we want to know what is the importance of linkages for different sectors, right. So, because of the Make in India initiative by the government, for example, gives a lot of emphasis on manufacturing. People are also complaining that our manufacturing is not growing, our growth is driven by services. Now, is this focus on manufacturing is justified? Do we have to really worry that manufacturing is not growing? Now, the answer to all that depends upon the linkages, the importance of linkages for different sectors. Now, if manufacturing has a strong backward linkages with other sectors, then promoting manufacturing makes sense, because if you grow manufacturing, it will help you to grow the entire economy, not just manufacturing, it will help you grow agriculture or services because of the linkage. Now, here what we do is we capture the importance of this linkage. Basically what it means is that in manufacturing, this is the manufacturing graph, the blue one, the top one, about 60% of domestic value addition reported for manufacturing is happened because of its linkage with other sectors. So, that means that other sectors benefited when manufacturing exports expanded. So, only 40% of the DVA was happened within manufacturing, the remaining 60% of the total DVA attributed to manufactured exports actually went to other sectors, which is basically services and agriculture. So, manufacturing has a strong linkage with the services and agriculture, but the other way it is not true. Like if your service sector grows, the export of service sector grows, it does not necessarily create a lot of jobs in manufacturing. The other way it is true, if manufacturing grows, export of manufacturing grows, it can create a lot of jobs in services, but not necessarily the reverse. So, we can do all that, we can also compute the forward linkage and all that. Okay. So, let me now show this graph. Now, we see that not this, we will show. Okay, let us get into the econometrics part first. So this is the back of the envelope calculation I said in the Apple iPod case. So in the Apple iPad example, the value of an iPad is $144. What China is getting $4. Now if you estimate the total number of Apple iPad sold in a given year, for which that estimate is available, Apple sold 54.83 million units of iPods in that year. So if you multiply that number with $4, what China got? China got 219 million from assembly activity, right? This number is not small, right? Even though $4 looks like a small, it got from a single product. This is what they are getting from a single product. Now they are assembly center for many products. Now think about what China gets, even though DVA divided by export is small. DVA divided by export is only 4 divided by 144, which is very, very small, close to 0. Now once you are participating in this, what you get per unit of what you produce will be small, but you don't care about what you get per unit of what you produce. A smart businessman always look for scale expansion, right? He want to, like, you know, the restaurants where a lot of people go and eat, right? That fellow is making lot of money than the other posh restaurant where 1 or 2 people go, right? This is a posh restaurant, so 1 or 2 people pay a lot of money, but they spend, say, when they go there, they may be spending some 2,000, 5,000 rupees. The other person may be charging 50 rupees per meal. Who makes more money? The smart businessman who has a big scale always makes much more money. These are 2 different models. So what we are saying here is that, yeah.
On one side you are measuring GVA to gross export, so in relative terms that we are looking at, and one way you are saying it, look at the scale effect. So are compared to exporters, both are major differences.
No, that we cannot compare that way. We need an econometric analysis to do that. That is what we are coming to do. Okay, so let us come to the underlying mechanism which is at work here. This is not my creation. This is available in theory models. So basically, what it says is that when there is a greater participation in global production sharing, there is a greater use of imported intermediates. That would lead to a reduction in DVA to gross export ratio. When there is a reduction in gross export ratio because of the global scale, there is a scale and productivity effect of producing for the world market that lead to a higher absolute dollar value of gross export. The gross export goes up because of these. When the dollar value of gross export goes up, the absolute value of DVA also goes up. Domestic value addition goes up. When the absolute value of DVA goes up, number of jobs created increases. So this is the chain mechanism, right? This is the entire mechanism that we are talking about, which we wanted to test using this regression specification. So what we have here is, on the left hand side we have 3 equations here. These are all estimated in a simultaneous equation framework. Why? Because these are all interrelated. You cannot estimate one at a time, you know, ignoring the other, because these are all connected and interrelated and simultaneously determined, right? Your DVA, your export, your DVA to export ratio, your employment, everything is simultaneously determined. So we wanted that type of a framework to estimate this. So what we have is 3 equations. The first equation, on the left hand side, you have a log value of export from sector I in time period T. We have 112 sectors. We have 112 sectors for which we have estimates of all this, and we used all that. And on the right hand side here, this is a DVA to export ratio for that sector in T minus 1 year before, right? And then forget about these things, which will come to that, all other variables. In the second equation, this is a DVA equation. Now the DVA is the absolute dollar value of DVA, domestic value added from sector I in time T. and that is regressed on the dependent variable in the first equation. What is the dependent variable in the first equation? That is export. Gross export is coming here. Now, in the third equation, we have employment attributed to export. That depends upon this variable here. The dependent variable in the second equation comes as a independent variable in the third equation here. So, that means these are all simultaneous, right. The dependent variable in one equation is coming as independent variable in the next equation. Now, we would expect this alpha 1 to be negative because of the scale effect which we are talking about. Why alpha 1 should be negative? Because when the DVA to export ratio falls, we are participating in global value chain, that leads to a scale effect and a productivity effect. Then gross export in dollar terms, in absolute dollar terms, should increase, right. So, then a fall in this leads to an increase in this, that means this should be negative, right, inversely related. Now, a rise in this should lead to a rise in this. Gross export, when it increases, the DVA attributed to export should also increase. So, we should expect beta 1 to be positive, correct. It should be positive because it is directly related. Now, an increase in DVA in turn should lead to more number of jobs being created. So, we would expect this gamma 1 also be positive. Now, we have a number of control variables, right. These are our main variable of interest. Then we have control variables in each specification. Now, these control variables are grouped into two categories. One is a domestic activity variable, the other one is a relative price variable, right. These are the two groups of in any export specification. We generally have an activity variable, we have relative price variables. So, what is activity variable? Activity variable means the export from a given sector depends upon many things. We are introducing now this new term DVA divided by export, but there is a conventional argument what determines export. That includes the domestic GDP, domestic activity, foreign demand, world demand, the relative price of Indian product in comparison to world price. These are all variables which determines export, right. So, we wanted to include all these domestic activity variable which is usually used in these type of specifications, that we include. We also have a relative price variable, and we also, in addition to that, we have sector dummies, that there are sector specific features, right, which are like sector dummies, the certain characteristics of the sector which are fixed or time invariant. So, in order to control for those influences, we include sector dummies. We also include time dummies, because every year is different, there could be year specific shocks. So, to control for year specific shocks, we also have a time dummies. We also have a world demand. This is the world demand in a given sector. So, how much India can export in a given sector J depends upon how the world is buying that sector, output from that sector. If the world demand is not high, then our export will be low, right. So, we would expect a positive relationship for alpha 4, which is world demand. Okay. So, this is the employment will go down. So, that is what we would expect. Okay. So, here real wages is there, because this is an employment equation. So, we have all the control variables including sector dummies and year dummies. So, this is what our first result is. So, what we do is that we do this estimation in 3 stage least square. Now, 3SLS is a regression technique which is generally used when you have simultaneous equations. When you have a simultaneous system of equations to be estimated, 3SLS is more robust than actually 2SLS, because 3SLS is a combination of 2SLS and the seemingly unrelated regression. Seemingly unrelated regression takes care of the covariance among the different equations. So, because all these sectors are interrelated, right. So, there is a equation covariance that is taken care of, and also the simultaneity is taken care of. So, that is why we estimate 3SLS, and to avoid certain time series issues in the data, we also estimate it in first difference levels as well as in first difference, and number of which one? Three equations. Yes, yes.
Suppose you have 10 equations.
Ah, ah.
So then also
Generally, this is used. Yeah, it doesn't depend upon. No. This has nothing to do with the three equations. That is only a that's only a coincidence. You can use it even if it is 2 equations or 4 equations. So 3 SLS is a general method. Yeah.
it is combination of 2 SLS.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you take the first difference,
Hmm.
that gets overcome in the 2 SLS.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's why this it gives the final result.
Yeah, no, that is not basically the logic. I like to find out why that name 3 SLS came, but it has nothing to do with the number of equations.
No, that I get.
Yeah.
That I get.
Yeah.
Why not dynamic 3SLS?
That is also estimated as a robustness. I will show that result also. Yeah. Both dynamic as well as 3 SLS, random effect, fixed effect, everything is there. Okay. So what we are interested is 3 variables of interest. One is this DVA to export ratio in the gross export equation. So this you can estimate in Stata. Usually there is a command for estimating 3 SLS. So you have to say that our first equation is this, second equation is this, third equation is this, right? And then you have to say which is endogenous variable. For the endogenous variable, it will use the instrument. Instrument is its own lagged values, right? That is why it is 2 SLS, right? So that is the way it is estimated in Stata, this thing. So this variable, we expect this to be negative and significant, and we get that negative and significant in all specification, whether it is in level or first difference. We get the that it is negative and significant. And then the second equation, we are more interested in this. This is our major variable of interest. Gross export should be positively related to DVA in dollar terms, and we expect that positive, and we are getting that to be positive. Third one, this is the employment equation, where we expect this DVA to be positively related to the employment, and we are getting that. So basically our main variables of interest, they all show expected signs, like on the basis of what is our channel that we have in mind and what is we expect, and most of the time the control variables show expected results, but we are not so much interested in that. I am not spending much time there. For example, world demand is positive and significant. Higher the world demand in a sector, greater is our gross export, right? Wage rate, for example, is negative and significant. So that means that if the real wages goes down, employment increases, right? And vice versa. And relative price variable generally show as expected. Now we do this also for, there are 2 samples for which we are making the estimation. One is only for manufacturing sectors, the other one is all sectors, manufacturing, service and agriculture together. So we have these estimates for them separately, total and manufacturing, and we get similar results. And we cannot do it separately for agriculture and services, mainly because the number of sectors in agriculture are few. So the number of observation gets very few. So that's why we do only for manufacturing and then the total. Okay, so here is the dynamic panel result. You are getting same thing for dynamic panel. If you estimate GMM, right? GMM estimation, the system equation. Then again you get a negative coefficient. The coefficient values are different, right? Because these are different models. So you don't get the, because these are not the simultaneous equation models. These are all estimated separately. The earlier one is all estimated together. This is a simultaneous equation framework. Here they are estimated separately because these are standard other models, like which you estimate. So the coefficient values are different, but the signs are same, and they are all statistically significant.
This square can be done in the dynamic panel model setting.
No,
It has to be,
it has to be separate. Okay, so but you see that even in 3 SLS I have fixed effects So, what we have there is, because of the fixed effects, it is a panel data method only. So, all the time invariant factors etc. are controlled. Okay. So, then we also estimate fixed effect, standard fixed effect, standard random effect, and we get a broadly consistent results. These results are robust, right, particularly with respect to our main variables of interest, and what it shows is that greater participation of a sector in global production sharing, GPS means global production sharing, causes the absolute dollar value of exports to increase, right. A 10% decline in the ratio, DVA to export ratio, in the literature it is called VAX ratio, that is why it is coming. So, that leads to an increase in the dollar value of manufactured products exports by 17.9%. These are quantitative significance of those coefficients which we are getting, and I am not going to do that. So, okay, so this is this question about how does India compare with other countries in this, in DVA to export ratio. So, if you, these are estimates for other countries, China, Malaysia, India, Singapore, Korea, Thailand. This is not based on my estimate, it is available on the basis of other data which is available, which I will tell you where you can get if you want to get that. So, here India is here, India is in the top, that means our DVA to export ratio is still high compared to other successful countries in the world. This China, this value is close to India, but it is it's an overestimation for certain reasons which I do not have time to explain, but China's actual value is much lower than this. This is for South Asia, other South Asian countries. Where does India compare? Other South Asian countries, this is the India value, it has declined, but you see Sri Lanka values are much lower than that of India.